This is from
Senator Deuell. For what purpose does the senator from Hunt County wish to be recognized?
Mr. President, I was wondering if Senator Davis would answer some questions.
Senator Davis, will you yield to Senator Deuell?
I'm happy to answer your question, Senator Deuell, but I, in doing so, will not yield the floor. I do not give up the floor.
You will maintain the floor. Question, Senator Davis. Senator Deuell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have no intention of taking the floor from you, Senator Davis. I think all of us share the compassion for many of the people whose testimony you have read. I wanted, my first question is that some of the references that you've made and some of the references that some of the people whose testimony you read talk about women being degraded, called liars, or in some way being held in contempt. I was wondering what you found in this bill that holds any disregard for a woman facing the tough decision of whether or not to have an abortion.
What I find in this bill that disregards women who are confronting this decision are numerous. But I'll start with this, Senator Deuell. The ambulatory surgical center requirements have no basis in medical fact or science that necessitates the need for a woman to have an abortion procedure there. And in fact, you will probably recall numerous times I asked Senator Hager to provide some empirical evidence for us to understand what was unsafe in the clinical setting today and how that would be made safer by virtue of this bill. And he was not able to provide any information to answer my question. That same question, I'm aware, was asked in the House hearings on this particular bill, and it was asked in the Senate hearings on this particular bill. And what we know, and I think we would agree, is that today, out of the 42 clinics that provide safe, legal abortion services for women in Texas, only 5 of those currently satisfy the conditions of the ambulatory surgical center. And I understand that the response has been given, well, make all the others come up. And there have been statements made that somehow abortion doctors are getting rich off of these facilities and they ought to be willing to put this money back into them in order to assure that women have proper health care. But absent any justification, any reason that demonstrates why somehow these centers would provide better health care, I have to ask myself the question, and I know so many other women in Texas are asking themselves the question, to what purpose then does this bill serve? And could it be, might it just be, a desire to limit women's access to safe, healthy, legal, constitutionally protected abortions in the state of Texas?
Well, I know you've referenced a certain Twitter, but do you feel that that's the same sentiment by the members in this body who support this bill?
Senator Deuell, I don't want to impose upon any member an unkind starting point. I would hope to choose that every member on this floor shares a concern for women, men, and children. But because I've been unable to have a simple question answered that helps me understand how this leads to better care for women, I do have to question the justifying, the underlying reasons for advancing this.
Why do you think the 5 clinics, the abortion clinics that have become ambulatory surgical centers, have done so?
You know, I don't have the expertise to answer that question.
You just think it might be to provide better care?
Well, you know, what I think it might be is that years ago, before I was here in the Senate, a decision was made that for pregnancies of 16 weeks or longer, those needed to take place in ambulatory surgical centers. And I'm sure that there was some response to that in terms of the growth of these 5 centers in the state of Texas to address that need. And I, as I said, was not here at that time. I don't know if there was information provided that because terminating a woman's pregnancy at 16 weeks or longer presents a greater risk, and that there actually was some connection made between that greater standard of medical facility and the ability to provide a safer environment for women existed. I don't know, but I would imagine that's why we have those 5.
Well, do you remember the papers that I gave you about the requirements of an ambulatory surgical center some weeks ago when I spoke to the Democratic caucus?
Yes, I do.
Did you review that?
I browsed through it, yes. I didn't read it word for word.
You compared it with, it's comparing with abortion centers and then the ambulatory surgical clinics. Why do we have, do you know why we have ambulatory surgical clinics? Why we have that designation?
Well, my understanding is it's for procedures that might require a certain amount of medical attention that wouldn't otherwise be provided in another clinical setting. But I also understand, Dr. Deuell, Senator Deuell, that there are all sorts of outpatient procedures, some of which are more invasive than an abortion procedure, and we aren't requiring that they be delivered through the services of an ambulatory surgical center. And again, I'm yet to understand, I'm yet to hear what the specific reason is that this particular medical procedure should occur in such a facility. And I'm yet to understand how it is that we have not given pause to the impact that this will have on women's ability to access that safe, legal care. And when you layer it upon what happened in the last legislative session with the sonogram bill, I believe that in Texas a climate is being created that is slowly but surely chipping away at a woman's right to safe legal abortion, not because the right itself is being taken away, but because for some women, the ability to access that right is being taken away.
Well, I don't agree that this bill does that, Senator Davis. The intent of this bill, by the people that helped write it, and I'm one of them, is to increase safety. Now, you cited evidence from ACOG and various other medical entities, but do you think that those entities who wrote you represent every physician in Texas?
Well, of course they do not. And in fact, I believe when I just read some of the letters from ACOG, they described themselves as a member organization, and I stated the number of doctors who were members of that organization. I can't remember what it was.
Sure. Did you agree with ACOG's support of tort reform?
I do believe that tort reform was an important reform.
So you agreed with them there. You've read a lot of testimony. Are you going to read all of the testimony that was submitted at the committee meeting, both pro and con, or are you just reading testimony from people who are against this bill? The
testimony that I'm reading was from women who had signed up to speak and who at the very late hour of about 1 a.m. were told they were not going to be able to speak.
Sure, I understand that, but there were also people that were for this bill that didn't get to speak as well. Is that not correct?
I'm sure that is correct, and I'm sure that you have the ability to read that information yourself if you'd like to read it and ask me a question about it.
Well, I don't have that available. I was just curious if you were going to read everyone's testimony. Do you think the traditions of the Texas Senate are more important than women's safety?
Of course not.
And you mentioned a raw abuse of power. Could you explain that a little bit? I mean, we have a process here. How do you feel that this bill is a raw abuse of power?
Well, first of all, I think it's a false choice to say that we should have to choose between women's health and the traditions of the Texas Senate. The traditions of the Texas Senate actually in the regular session assured that differing perspectives on women's health were made a part of the legislative decision-making that occurred here. And when I talk about abuse of power, I don't believe that in a little d democratic state, an individual should have the opportunity and the ability to override the expressed desires, thoughts, concerns, interests of people that are represented by the 31 senators here on the Senate floor.
Well, Senate Bill 530...
And I believe, let me finish answering you. And I believe that in the regular session, democracy with a little d worked to assure the balance of those opinions made its way into the bills that passed into a law and those that did not. Well, but after we adjourned, and within the hour, as you know, we were called back by a single individual exercising his executive power over the state of Texas, Governor Perry. And you know that another single individual, and we've made our concerns known to our president about this, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, chose not to recognize the two-thirds rule as part of the way we would take up and consider legislation in the special session. I believe that when two individuals exercise power in that way, it abuses the power they've been entrusted with because it denies the minority voices who are represented by Democratic senators on this floor an opportunity to be heard.
Well, thank you.
Well, the senator did mention me by name. Please, if you can, we'll maintain decorum.
Well, Senator Davis, Senate Bill 537, which was the facilities bill, which was my bill in the regular session, had 20 senators supporting it. That's 61.3% of the Senate. So when you speak of minorities and minority rule and raw power, do you not think it's fair that when 60% of the senators want that bill to be passed, that perhaps it's fair, that perhaps it should, since that probably represents a majority of the people of Texas?
Well, the polling doesn't demonstrate that it represents the majority of the people in Texas. And of course, you know as well as I do, and we could have a very long conversation, Senator Deuell, about the consequences of a history of redistricting in the state of Texas.
Well, I understand that, but in my particular district, the last time I ran against a Democrat, I got 67% of the vote, and I've been unapologetic about being pro-life. So would you certainly not think then that my vote to be pro-life, my support of this bill, would represent the majority, the overwhelming majority of my district, and that perhaps is also true to the other senators supporting this bill?
I think that very well may be the case, Senator Deuell, but I also think that many people in your district may have voted for you for other reasons than that. And in fact, oftentimes, on both sides of the party aisle, people vote based on the letter that's next to your name on the ballot. And it doesn't necessarily reflect their individual, independent decisions on a variety of issues. It may be the case that they feel on balance you represent their perspectives on most issues. But I would imagine there are probably people who voted for you and people who voted for some of the other Republican senators who are on our floor today would disagree with taking a decision on these particular bills, even if they themselves identify as Republicans and typically vote as Republicans.
Do you think you have constituents that voted for you that are in support of this bill?
That's probably likely.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask, Senator, was I think it was your words that this was treating women as though they're not capable. I think for most women who choose to have an abortion, it's the first time, although that's not always the case. But you know, women, as you've pointed out by some of the testimony, who are facing this tough decision are very vulnerable. Do you, given what's happened in Philadelphia and Houston and some other abortion clinics and these squalid conditions, and do you think perhaps that some of these vulnerable women should not have the state of Texas protect them by setting standards of care for their abortion?
I think that the state of Texas has already established a fine standard of care. In fact, I cited that from one of the letters that I read. A woman who works at one of these facilities talked about the variety of state agencies and municipal agencies that regulate them. And I think that we are doing our job. Certainly with the passage of constitutional protections for women and their ability to choose to make such a difficult decision, we've seen the standard of care rise tremendously because women are able to go to legal facilities that provide safe care for them.
And you think all abortion facilities are adequate for these women?
Senator Deuell, I'm sure just like every other clinic that treats colds, that treats geriatrics, perhaps dentist offices, orthodontists, I can't stand here today and tell you that every single one of them provides good care. But what I can tell you is that they have regulations in place that require that they do, and that we have the ability to respond when they don't. And again, where this particular bill is concerned, no one has said anything about the existing requirements in these facilities that is somehow creating an endangered environment for women. I have no doubt that in one or two or some of them, one or two or some women may have experienced care that none of us would be happy with. But it isn't because the facility was a problem, and it wasn't because the standards in the facility were a problem, and it wasn't because the regulations of those facilities were a problem. It was because sometimes when human beings are involved, as you know, in providing care, sometimes that care isn't what we all wish it would be. And changing to an ambulatory surgical center is going to do nothing to address that.
Well, I would disagree. I think that if you look at the regulations and the scrutiny, and if you might want to go back and review this paper that I gave you, you would see that that perhaps it would ensure that every woman gets a safe abortion under the best possible care. You know, Senator Davis, this bill really is about women's health. It really is about abortions. Mr. President, I don't remember the opposition or our side making any snide comments as Senator Davis spoke, and I would appreciate you holding decorum in this hall to the same standard.
Mr. President.
I have not yielded the floor, Mr.
Parliamentary
President.
inquiry, Mr. President. Mr. President, can you describe for the body and our guests Rule 306 and what the punishment for obstruction of proceedings here in the Senate is?